Hey guys, my name is Charles Martinez, and today we'll be looking at the book of Romans. We are going to pull out some things on the book of Romans just to kind of help us understand a little better for when we read it in our personal time. We want to pull out who wrote it, the purpose it was written to, and the theme of the book, followed by a quick chapter breakdown to kind of better understand it as we read it. So let's jump right in. The book of Romans was wrote by Paul, and we think he wrote it around 57 AD, possibly his third missionary trip, and he probably read it when he was in Corinth. Now, the people he wrote it to was a church in Rome, both Jews and Gentiles. The theme of the book was the gospel, God's plan of salvation and righteousness for all humankind, Jews and Gentiles alike, and that Jesus is the only way of salvation, nothing else but Jesus. Now, some of the purposes he wrote it for was he wrote it to prepare the way for his coming to visit to Rome and his proposed mission to Spain. And he also wrote it to present the basic system of salvation to a church that had not received the teaching of an apostle yet or before. He sought to explain also the relationship between Jews and Gentiles in God's overall plan of redemption. The Jewish Christians were being rejected by the larger Gentiles groups in the church because Jewish believers still felt constrained to observe dietary laws and sacred days. So some of the special characteristics that he wrote about were the emphasis when he emphasizes on Christians' doctrine. Now, the number and importance of theological themes touched upon are impressive that he talks about, such as sin and death, salvation, grace, faith, righteousness, justification, sanctification, redemption, resurrection, and glorification. All these things, man, I love reading them when you read the book of Romans. It just talks and points out so much detail about everything. He also used a widespread of Old Testament quotations. Right. So Paul regularly quoted from the Old Testament in some of his letters, and most in his letters, but in Romans, the argument is sometimes carried along by such quotations when he used this. So now let's jump right back in, or jump into the breakdown of the books. So when you read the book of Romans, you can break it down into 4 sections. And section 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 11, and 12 through 16. This will help you kind of pull out the major theme of the book and the flow of thought to kind of really grasp what Paul is trying to tell you. So between sections 1 through 4, or chapters 1 through 4, it talks about all humans need to be saved by God's grace. We are all sinners. Jews are sinners, Gentiles are sinners, the whole world are sinners. And it's through trusting in Jesus the Messiah that we receive salvation, not by obeying the Torah and following the Jewish practices that were established before, but that God's purpose was always to have a multi-ethnic church. And that was explained in chapters 1 through 4. Chapter 5 really points to that we are justified through faith and forgiven and in right relationships with God. And we are a new humanity in Jesus. Now, it talks about Adam being in relationship to humanity, the picture of Adam in relationship to humanity, that fallen Adam is in sin and slavery, and we all deserve God's judgment, and the consequences of that would be death. But in Jesus' obedience and love for God, and as he gave his life, we are saved through him and faith in him. Now, chapter 6 points about baptism. Now that we are saved, that we are joined in Christ in his baptism, and that baptism is symbolic of his death and resurrection, and we do it in obedience. Chapter 7 goes into, well, what about the law? What is the point of the law? And it talks about the Torah being great, being good, and the commandments showing God's will, but we as human beings are unable of keeping all the commandments and all the laws. So chapter 8 pours in hope that says through Jesus' Spirit that is being poured out in all his people, we are liberated to love God and your neighbors and empowered to obtain the law. Now, in chapters 9, it talks about, well, what about Israel's ethnic, or the ethnic of Israel? And in 9, it gives you a retelling of the story and how God brings good out of the rejection. Chapter 10 talks about why so many Israelites rejected Jesus to begin with, and the topics they point into is because they focused more on the commandments and Torah, and they did not recognize what God was doing through Jesus. Chapter 11 points that, is God done with ethnic Israel? And the answer is no, he is not done. And then also that non-Jewish Christians have been grafted in the tree. Chapter 12 and 13 talks about the unity and peace and love. Unity to serve others in the community of peace, and that love is the highest calling. Chapters 14 through 15 focus on the divisions in Rome, and Paul addresses this and asks them to show grace for each other's non-essential issues. Chapter 16 sums it up by a closing letter by Paul. He addresses all his people he ain't seen in a while, and also to watch out for those who call division. I hope this presentation helps you as your personal Bible study. Thank you.